Stranded on a frozen alien planet, she shares her body heat with the human, but it meant more than survival, the transport vessel. Meridian shuddered violently as it plummeted through the atmosphere of Kepler 44 to B, its hull screaming against the alien air. Lieutenant David Kane gripped his restraints as sparks flew from damaged control panels around him. The ship had been carrying a diplomatic convoy to the outer colonies when pirates struck, leaving them stranded and falling toward this frozen wasteland. "Brace for impact," shouted the pilot, moments before everything went black. David awoke to the bitter taste of blood and the sound of howling wind. The transport had split in half, its twisted metal frame scattered across a field of crystalline ice. Steam rose from the wreckage, but he knew that warmth wouldn't last long. The emergency beacon flickered weakly in the distance. Crushed beneath a section of the hull through the haze of smoke and snow, David spotted movement. A figure emerged from the other half of the wreckage, moving with an almost liquid grace. Despite the harsh conditions, as she drew closer, he could see she wasn't human. Her skin held a soft blue luminescence, and intricate silver patterns traced along her arms and neck. She wore the standard diplomatic robes of the Zenthari delegation, though they were now torn and frost-covered. "Human," she said, her voice carrying a melodic quality that seemed to cut through the wind. "Are you injured?" David tried to stand, wincing as pain shot through his left leg.
"What? Nothing fatal?"
"You're Ambassador Kira's translator, aren't you?"
Zephyr,
she replied, extending a hand to help him up. And Ambassador Kira didn't survive the crash. The weight of those words hit him harder than the cold. The peace talks between Earth and the Zenthari Collective had been years in the making. Now their lead diplomat was dead and they were stranded. On a planet where the temperature dropped to minus 80 degrees Celsius at night. "We need to find shelter," Zephyr said, scanning the desolate landscape. "This planet's rotation cycle means we have maybe 4 hours before the killing cold sets in." David nodded, forcing himself to focus on survival rather than the political implications of their situation. They scavenged what they could from the wreckage. Emergency rations, basic first aid kit, and a single thermal blanket that looked pitifully inadequate for the task ahead. There, Zephyr pointed to a rocky outcropping. About half a kilometer away, those formations might provide some protection from the wind. They trudged through the snow, David's injured legs slowing their progress. The alien woman moved with surprising efficiency, her body seemingly more adapted to the cold than his own. When they reached the rocks, they found a small, cave-like depression. That would have to suffice. As the first moon rose and the temperature began its deadly plunge, David realized the thermal blanket was useless. His teeth chattered uncontrollably, and he could feel the dangerous numbness creeping into his extremities. Military training had taught him about hypothermia, but this was beyond anything Earth could produce. "You're going to die," Zephyr observed, matter-of-factly watching him shiver. "Probably," David managed through chattering teeth, "but I'll try to make it to morning." Zephyr was quiet for a long moment, then moved closer. "My people regulate body temperature differently than yours. We generate heat through bioluminescent processes." She hesitated, then continued. "I could share my warmth with you, but it would require close physical contact." David looked at her, understanding the implications. In the diplomatic world, such intimacy between species was unprecedented. Yet survival trumped protocol. "I won't make assumptions about your intentions," he said carefully. "I won't make assumptions about yours," she replied. "This is about staying alive." As she settled against him, David felt an immediate rush of warmth. Her skin radiated heat like a living furnace, and the silver patterns on her arms glowed brighter in response to the cold. For the first time since the crash, he felt hope. "Thank you," he whispered. "Don't thank me yet," Zephyr murmured, her breath warm against his ear. "We still have to survive until rescue arrives." But as David drifted towards sleep, warmed by her alien heat, he couldn't shake the feeling that this arrangement had already changed something fundamental between them. Dawn came with no real sun. Just a gradual lightening of the perpetual twilight that seemed to define this frozen world. David woke to find himself still pressed against Zephyr, her warmth having kept him alive through the night. Her silver patterns pulsed gently with each breath, and he found himself mesmerized by the alien beauty of her physiology. Her body, Temperature stabilized around 3 hours ago, she said without opening her eyes. Your species adapts more quickly than our scientists predicted. David carefully extracted himself from their shared warmth, immediately missing the comfort. Long can you maintain that kind of heat generation? Indefinitely if I have adequate nutrition, Zephyr replied, sitting up and assessing their situation. But our rations won't last more than 5 days. The reality of their predicament settled over them like the morning frost. They were stranded. On an uninhabited planet with minimal supplies, no working communication equipment, and no guarantee that anyone would find them. The peace talks would continue without them, assuming both sides didn't declare the crash an act of war. We need to explore, David said, checking his sidearm and the few tools they'd salvaged. Find water, maybe some form of shelter that doesn't require us to... He gestured awkwardly at their sleeping arrangement. Zephyr's expression remained neutral. You found sharing body heat uncomfortable? Not uncomfortable, David replied honestly. Just... complicated. They ventured out into the alien landscape, following a frozen stream that wound between jagged rock formations. The planet's geology was unlike anything David had encountered, with crystalline structures that seemed to grow from the very ground. Some formations were tall as trees, others formed natural bridges spanning chasms of unknown depth. Beautiful, Zephyr murmured, touching one of the crystal formations. My people would consider this a sacred place. Your people believe in the divine? David asked, genuinely curious. We believe in the interconnectedness of all energy, she replied. Heat, light, life force. They're all variations of the same fundamental power. As they walked, David found himself studying his companion more closely. Despite the diplomatic robes, she moved with a predator's grace. Her hands, when she gestured, showed calluses that spoke of combat training. This wasn't just a translator. You're military, he stated. Zephyr paused. I was before I became a diplomat. What changed? I believed peace was possible, she said simply. I still do. They discovered a hot spring nestled between two crystal formations, its warm water a blessed relief in the frozen wasteland. Steam rose from the surface, creating a microclimate that was almost comfortable. David knelt to test the water's temperature, while Zephyr examined the mineral deposits around the spring's edge. This could work, David said. Build a shelter here. Use the thermal energy. It's unstable, Zephyr warned, pointing to stress fractures in the surrounding rock. The thermal expansion could cause the whole formation to collapse. Then we make it temporary, David decided. It's just long enough for rescue to arrive. They worked through the day, using debris from the crash to construct a lean-to shelter beside the spring. The work was exhausting, but it kept them warm and gave them hope. David found himself appreciating Zephyr's practical intelligence and her willingness to take on physical labor despite her diplomatic status. As the second night approached, they huddled together again in their makeshift shelter, the hot springs. Warmth helped, but the killing cold still required them to share body heat. This time, the contact felt less awkward, more natural. David, Zephyr said quietly as they settled against each other. There's something you should know about my peoples. Heat generation. What? It's not just biological. It's emotional. It's the warmer I feel towards someone, the more heat I can produce. David was quiet for a moment, processing this information. And how do you feel toward me? Warmer than I expected, she admitted. Which is why you survived last night, when by all rights, you should have died. The implications hung between them like the steam from the hot spring. They were no longer just two strangers sharing warmth for survival. Something deeper was developing. Something that transcended the vast differences between their species. Is that a problem? David asked. I don't know, Zephyr replied honestly. My people's customs, your people's customs, they don't exactly have protocols for this situation. Then maybe we write our own, David suggested. Pulling her closer as the temperature dropped, as they drifted towards sleep, warmed by alien heat. In growing affection, neither of them noticed the distant lights moving across the frozen landscape. They were no longer alone on this planet. The sound of movement across ice woke David from dreams of warmth. He opened his eyes to find Zephyr already alert, her silver patterns dim to avoid detection. Her hand rested on his chest, and he could feel her elevated heart rate through there. Shared contact. "How many?" he whispered. "3, maybe 4, she breathed back. "They've been circling our position for the past hour." David carefully reached for his sidearm, grateful for the weapon's familiar weight. Through the gaps in their shelter, he could see shapes moving in the pre-dawn darkness. Not human shapes. Not Xanthari either. "The planet's supposed to be uninhabited," he said. "Supposed to be," Zephyr agreed grimly. "But the galaxy is full of surprises." The creatures that emerged from the shadows were unlike anything in the xenobiology textbooks. They moved on for powerful legs, their bodies covered in thick, shaggy fur that seemed to absorb light. Their eyes glowed with an inner fire, and their breath steamed in the frigid air. Most disturbing of all, they showed clear signs of intelligence, coordinating their movements with silent communication. "Ice wolves," Zephyr identified quietly. "I've heard stories, but they were thought to be extinct." "Well, someone forgot to tell them," David muttered. Watching the pack leader test the air with obvious interest in their scent, the alpha wolf approached their shelter with cautious steps, its massive head lowering to peer inside. Up close, David could see the intelligence in its burning eyes, the way it studied them with what seemed like calculation rather than mere hunting instinct. "They're curious," Zephyr observed. "Not immediately hostile. That's good? Maybe my people's legends speak of ice wolves as guides, not predators. They're said to appear in times of great change." The pack leader made a low sound, almost like speech, and the other wolves spread out in what was clearly a protective formation. David lowered his weapon slightly, sensing that aggression might be the wrong response. "They're not hunting us." He realized they're protecting us. From what? Their answer came as a low rumble that shook the ground. In the distance, David could see lights moving with mechanical precision across the landscape. Vehicles. Military vehicles. "Salvage teams," Zephyr said, her expression darkening. "Pirates often follow crash sites to strip valuable technology. Or to eliminate witnesses," David added. Understanding the wolf's protective behavior, the pack leader padded closer, its massive form radiating surprising warmth. It looked directly at Zephyr and made a series of soft sounds that seemed almost like language. She responded with clicks and whistles that David had never heard her use before. "You can communicate with them?" he asked, amazed. "My people's ancient tongue shares roots with many species," she explained. "They're offering to guide us to safety, and you trust them more than I trust whoever's in those vehicles," Zephyr replied. They gathered their few possessions and followed the pack into the crystal formations. The wolves moved with supernatural grace across the treacherous ice, their paws finding purchase where human feet would slip. David found himself holding Zephyr's hand as they navigated the dangerous terrain, her warmth providing comfort and stability. The chase began in earnest as searchlights swept the area they'd just vacated. Shouts in multiple languages echoed across the landscape, none of them friendly. The pirates had found their crash site and were now hunting for survivors. "This way," the pack leader seemed to say, leading them deeper into a maze of crystal caves. Inside the caves, the temperature was noticeably warmer, heated by geothermal activity. The walls themselves glowed with soft phosphorescence, creating an otherworldly beauty. David and Zephyr pressed deeper into the cave system, guided by the wolves and pursued by increasingly desperate voices. "They're not just after salvage," Zephyr said as they paused to rest. "They know who we are." "The peace talks," David realized. "Someone wants to make sure they fail." "My people have enemies who would benefit from continued conflict," Zephyr agreed, "as do yours." The wolves led them to a vast underground chamber where warm springs bubbled up from the depths. The space was enormous, with multiple passages leading, off in different directions. It would be easy to lose their pursuers here, but it would also be easy to get lost themselves. "We make our stand here," David decided. "If they want us, they'll have to come through the wolves." As if understanding his words, the pack spread out in defensive positions. The alpha wolf approached Zephyr again, nuzzling her hand with what seemed like affection. She scratched behind its ears, and David was amazed to see her silver patterns pulse in response to the contact. "They're not just protecting us," she said wonderingly. "They're accepting us as part of their pack. Is that significant?" "Ice wolves. Mate for life," Zephyr explained, her eyes meeting his. "They only accept those who share true bonds." The implications of her words hung between them as the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the caves. Whatever was developing between them, it was about to be tested by fire. "Together?" David asked, checking his weapon. "Together," Zephyr agreed, her skin beginning to glow with combat readiness. The wolves howled in unison, a sound that spoke of ancient loyalty and newfound purpose. The hunt was about to begin. The first pirate stumbled into the chamber with overconfidence, his plasma rifle scanning the glowing space. He never saw the ice wolf that took him down from above, the creature's massive form moving with liquid silence. His scream echoed through the caverns, alerting his companions to the danger they now faced. "Spread out," came a harsh voice from the tunnel entrance. "To survivors and some local wildlife, nothing we can't handle." David positioned himself behind a crystal formation, his sidearm trained on the entrance. Beside him, Zephyr's skin had begun to glow with an intensity he'd never seen before, her silver patterns blazing like molten metal. The wolves moved through the chamber like ghosts, their burning eyes the only sign of their presence.
Oh.
"Using thermal scanners," Zephyr whispered. "My heat signature will give us away." "Then we use that," David replied, "an idea forming." "Can you control the intensity? Within limits? Why?" "Draw them deeper into the chamber. Make them think you're alone and wounded." Zephyr nodded, dimming her luminescence to a weak flutter. She moved into the open, limping convincingly as she made her way toward the thermal springs. The bait was irresistible to the pursuing pirates. 3 more figures entered the chamber, their movements coordinated and professional. These weren't simple scavengers. They were military contractors, well-armed and experienced. David recognized their gear as hegemony standard issue, which meant this wasn't random piracy. There, one of them pointed at Zephyr, the alien diplomat. "Command wants her alive. What about the human? Expendable." David's blood ran cold. This was an assassination contract, designed to eliminate key figures from the peace negotiations. Someone with serious resources wanted the war to continue. The first contractor moved toward Zephyr, his weapon trained on her seemingly helpless form. He never saw the wolf that emerged from the thermal springs, its fur steaming with mineral-heated water. The creature's jaws closed around his weapon arm with crushing force, and his scream joined the echoes of his fallen comrade. "Contact! They've got some kind of..." The second contractor's words were cut off as David's shots found their mark. The man spun and fell, his armor smoking from the plasma impacts. The third contractor took cover behind a crystal formation, his position mirrored by David's on the opposite side. "Krensky," the remaining pirate called out. "Former Earth Alliance, dishonorably discharged. Someone's paying good money for your head." "Sorry to disappoint," David replied, signaling to Zephyr, "but I'm not that easy to kill." The wolf pack moved, with supernatural coordination, flanking the remaining pirate while David provided covering fire, but the contractor was skilled, using the crystal formations for cover while his thermal scanner tracked the heat signatures moving around him. "Clever," the pirate called out. "But thermal vision works both ways." He fired a grenade toward thermal springs, the explosion sending superheated water spraying across the chamber. The wolves yelped and scattered, their coordination broken by the scalding steam. One of them, a smaller female, cried out in pain as the boiling water caught her flank. Zephyr's response was immediate and overwhelming. Her entire body blazed with light as she channeled her people's ancestral fury. The temperature in the chamber spiked dramatically, and the crystal formations began to sing with harmonic resonance. David had never seen anything like it. "Now I understand," she said, her voice carrying an otherworldly quality, "why my people were once feared as warriors." The pirate's thermal scanner overloaded from the intensity of her heat signature. Half blinded and disoriented, He stumbled backward just as the pack leader launched itself through the air. The massive wolf's impact drove the man to the ground, and David's final shots ensured he wouldn't rise again. In the sudden silence that followed, David rushed to Zephyr's side. She was still glowing, but her light was flickering dangerously. The energy expenditure had pushed her to her limits. "Too much," she gasped, collapsing against him. "Used too much energy." "You saved us all," David said, supporting her weight. As he guided her toward the thermal springs, the pack-me, probably the peace talks themselves. The injured wolf approached them cautiously, her burned flank causing her to limp. Zephyr reached out despite her exhaustion, her glowing hand touching the creature's wound. The wolf's eyes widened as healing warmth flowed into her injury. "My people," Zephyr explained weakly, "we're connected to all living energy. What hurts one, hurts all." David watched in amazement as the wolf's wound began to close, the healing process accelerated by Zephyr's touch. The other wolves gathered. Around them, their eyes reflecting something like reverence. "They see you as their alpha now," David realized. "You protected the pack." "We protected each other," Zephyr corrected, her hand finding his. "All of us." As her strength began to return, David helped her settle beside the warm springs. The immediate danger had passed, but their situation remained precarious. The pirates had found them once, others would follow. "The peace talks," Zephyr said, her voice stronger now. "Someone's willing to commit murder to stop them." "Then we need to get off this planet," David replied. "Get back to civilization and expose whoever's behind this." "The wolves," Zephyr said suddenly. "They're not just protecting us. They're trying to tell us something." The pack leader approached them again, making those soft sounds that resembled speech. This time, David thought he could almost understand. "The meaning. They know a way off the planet," he said with sudden certainty. "Don't they?" Zephyr nodded, her silver patterns pulsing with excitement. "There's an old research station in the northern mountains. Abandoned, but possibly still functional." "How far?" 3 days' travel, through some of the most dangerous terrain on the planet. David looked at the wolf pack, these magnificent creatures who had risked their lives to protect 2 strangers. Then he looked at Zephyr, her alien beauty made even more striking by the trials they'd shared. "Together?" he asked, the word carrying new meaning after everything they'd been through. "Together," she agreed, and in that moment, David knew their bond had transcended mere survival. They were partners now in every sense of the word. The wolves howled their agreement. The sound echoed through the crystal caves like a promise of adventure to come. The journey to the Northern Research Station tested every survival skill David had learned in his military career. The ice wolves led them through treacherous mountain passes where the wind could freeze exposed skin in minutes. Zephyr's heat. Generation kept them alive, but David could see the toll it was taking on her. Her silver patterns had dimmed to a faint glow, and she moved with the careful precision of someone conserving energy. "How much further?" David asked as they sheltered behind an ice formation during a particularly violent storm. "The pack leader says we're close," Zephyr replied, her hand resting on the great wolf's flank. "But there's something else. Something they're afraid of." "More pirates?" "No. Something older. Something that's been sleeping in the mountains." David didn't like the sound of that, but they had no choice. The research station was their only hope of getting a message to the outside galaxy. The peace talks would continue in 3 days. And if they weren't there to report the assassination attempt, the wrong people would control the narrative. The station, when they finally reached it, was a marvel of engineering embedded directly into the mountainside. Its solar collectors still functioned despite decades of abandonment, and the main power systems hummed with dormant energy. The wolves refused to enter, instead taking up guard positions around the perimeter. "They're protecting us from something." "Inside," Zephyr observed as they approached the main entrance. "Or protecting something inside from us," David countered. The station's interior was a time capsule of early galactic exploration. Research logs dating back 50 years detailed the planet's unique ecosystem, including references to the sleeping guardian that the original researchers had discovered but never fully understood. "Look at this!" Zephyr called from the communication center. The transmitter's still functional, but it needs a massive energy surge to punch through the planet's magnetic field. David examined the power requirements, more than the station can generate. We'd need. He paused, looking at his companion. We'd need a Xanthari heat source. The kind of energy I used in the caves, Zephyr said, understanding immediately. But David, that much power expenditure could kill me. There has to be another way. They worked through the day, exploring every possible alternative. The station's archives contained detailed schematics and power calculations, but the conclusion was always the same. It's only a Xanthari bioluminescent surge could provide the necessary energy. As night fell, they made camp in the station's living quarters. The wolves had begun howling outside, their voices carrying a note of warning that made David's skin crawl. Something was stirring in the mountains, something that their presence had awakened. "Tell me about your people," David said as they shared their meager rations. "Before the diplomacy, before the war, what were you like?" Zephyr smiled, her patterns flickering with memory. "We were explorers, philosophers. We believed that the universe was meant to be experienced, not conquered. Each world we discovered taught us something new about the nature of existence. And then you met us. Humanity," she said thoughtfully, "challenged everything we thought we knew. Your species feels so intensely, loves so fiercely, fights so desperately. You made us realize that existence without passion is barely living at all." David reached for her hand, feeling the warmth that had kept him alive through their ordeal. "Is that why you became a diplomat? To bridge the gap between our peoples?" "I became a diplomat," Zephyr said, "because I fell in love with the idea of what we could become together, humans and Xanthari, combining your passion with our wisdom. And now I've fallen in love with more than just the idea." The words hung between them like a confession. David had been feeling it too, the growing connection that transcended their different biologies. What had begun as shared survival had evolved into something deeper, something that neither of their species had experienced before. Outside, the wolves' howling grew more urgent. Through the station's windows, David could see lights moving in. The mountain peaks, not the harsh glare of artificial illumination, but something organic, something alive. "The Guardian," Zephyr said, her voice filled with wonder. "It's waking up." The creature that emerged from the mountain's depths was beyond anything in the xenobiology textbooks. Massive and crystalline, it moved with the slow majesty of a living glacier. Its body was composed of the same mineral formations they'd seen throughout the planet, but arranged in patterns that suggested intelligence, purpose. "It's beautiful," David breathed, watching the creature's form shift and flow like liquid crystal. "It's dying," Zephyr said sadly. "The research logs mentioned it. The planet's core is cooling, and the Guardian is tied to the thermal energy. That's why the wolves brought us here," David realized. "Not just for the transmitter, for this." Guardian approached the station slowly, its crystalline form casting rainbows in the moonlight. When it reached the building, it extended what might have been a hand toward the wall. The entire structure began to resonate with harmonic frequencies. "It's trying to communicate," Zephyr said, pressing her palm against the wall. "Like it knows we need to leave, and it's offering to help. At what cost? Its life force. The Guardian can provide the energy for the transmitter, but it will use up what little time it has left." David felt a profound sadness at the creature's sacrifice. Here was a being that had lived for millennia, and it was willing to die to help. "Two strangers send a message to the stars. There has to be another way," he said. "There is," Zephyr replied, her eyes meeting his.
Hi.
"We combine our energies, my bioluminescence, guided by your species' emotional intensity. Together we might be able to both power the transmitter and save the Guardian. Is that even possible? I don't know, but I know I want to try." They approached the communication array together, the Guardian's crystalline form towering over them. David placed his hands on the transmission controls, while Zephyr positioned herself at the power coupling. The wolves gathered outside, their howling creating a symphony of encouragement. "Ready?" David asked. "Together," Zephyr said, and began to glow. The energy that flowed between them was unlike anything either had experienced. David's human emotions, his growing love for Zephyr, his determination to save both their peoples, his grief for the dying, Guardiancium to amplify and focus her bioluminescent power. The station's system surged to life. The transmitter began its sequence. The message they sent was simple but profound. The coordinates of their location, the evidence of the assassination attempt, and a promise that love could transcend the barriers between species. As the transmission punched through the planet's magnetic field and raced toward the stars, David felt something fundamental shift in the universe. The Guardian's crystalline form began to glow brighter, not with the light of dying, but with renewed life. The combined energy of human emotion and Xanthari bioluminescence had not only powered the transmitter but had somehow recharged the ancient creature's failing systems. "Impossible," Zephyr whispered, but her eyes were shining with joy. "Maybe," David replied, pulling her close. "Or maybe some things are bigger than what we think is possible." The rescue ships arrived within hours, guided by their signal. As they prepared to leave the planet, David looked back at the Guardian and the wolf pack that had protected them. Some bonds, he realized, could never be broken. Zephyr's hand found his as they boarded the rescue vessel. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we go home," David said. "Both of us together. And we show the galaxy what's possible when two species stop fighting and start loving." The peace talks that followed were unlike any in galactic history. The story of their survival had spread throughout both human and Xanthari space, inspiring a new generation of diplomats and visionaries. The war that had seemed inevitable instead became the foundation for the greatest alliance the galaxy had ever known. And on a frozen planet in the Outer Rim, a crystalline guardian watched over ice wolves who had learned that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the simple act of sharing warmth in the cold.